The quiet snip of shears was more than just a sound in Elias Washington's barbershop. It was a Sunday morning promise, a hushed ritual played out before the world outside had properly rubbed the sleep from its eyes. This was before the official flip of the open sign, before the usual cadence of paying customers filled the worn leather chairs. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. For years, Elias had dedicated these early hours to men who often went unseen, men whose service to the country had somehow led them to the precarious edges of society, homeless veterans. He worked with a steady hand, the old-fashioned straight razor glinting under the single bare bulb that always seemed to hum in tune with the low, soulful jazz drifting from ancient speakers. There were no cameras here, no self-congratulatory announcements, just the warm bloom of a hot towel, the clean scent of bay rum, and the profound, unspoken dignity of being truly seen, perhaps for the first time in a long time. His few regulars, those who knew of this Sunday service, often whispered that this little shop with its cracked linoleum floors and faded photographs was more church than any building with a steeple, even if no formal prayers were ever spoken aloud. The only sermon was the rhythmic dance of comb and scissors, the only collection plate the renewed sense of self Elias offered freely. He sought no recognition. His reward was the flicker of light returning to a tired man's eyes. But silence, even when deliberate, can sometimes echo in unexpected places. Word of his quiet, unwavering dedication carried on the grateful whispers of the men he served, and the observations of a few knowing community members began to ripple outwards from the shop's humble corner, eventually making its way to the polished halls of the state capitol. And so, one crisp Sunday morning, as the scent of brewing coffee mingled with that of lavender-scented shaving cream, the bell above the door chimed, a familiar sound, yet this time it heralded something entirely new. In walked the governor of the state, his suit immaculate, his aide hovering just behind him, asking for a trim. The man who had served so many, so silently, was about to be recognized in a way he had never sought, nor ever expected. But what happened next would change everything. Elias Washington was a man carved from patience and precision. His own youth had brushed against the rigid discipline of service, not in the armed forces, but in the disciplined craft of barbering learned at the knee of his father, whose own father had wielded shears in the same neighborhood. The shop itself was a legacy. Each crack in the linoleum a story, each faded spot on the leather strops a testament to generations of care. Elias had seen the neighborhood change, fortunes rise and fall, but the need for a good haircut, a moment of grooming and self-respect, remained constant. He'd learned early that a barber's chair was a confessional, a psychiatrist's couch, a neutral ground where men could shed their daily armor. His skills were an extension of his empathy. He listened more than he spoke, his hands interpreting the unspoken needs of the man in his chair. He'd endured the quiet ache of seeing good men falter, seen the casual dismissal of those who had sacrificed, and it had settled in him not as bitterness, but as a resolve to offer what small comfort he could. His worldview was simple. Every soul deserved dignity, a moment to feel whole. This philosophy was the bedrock of his Sunday mornings. His only regular assistant on these sacred Sundays, and increasingly during the week, was Marcus, a young man from the neighborhood teetering on the edge of manhood. Marcus had a quick smile and restless energy that Elias was patiently trying to channel into the focused art of barbering. He'd come into the shop a couple of years back, more interested in a place to hang out than a trade, but Elias's quiet dedication had slowly reeled him in. Now, Marcus swept hair, prepped towels, and watched Elias's hands with an almost reverent gaze, absorbing not just the technique but the ethos. He was family, in a way, the son Elias never had, and their bond was one of unspoken understanding, punctuated by Elias's gentle corrections and Marcus's eager questions. Elias saw a spark in Marcus, a potential for kindness that he hoped to nurture. The antagonist, if one could call it that, wasn't a person but a system, a distant entity embodied by the polished facade of the state capitol. It was the world of political maneuvering, of photo opportunities and carefully crafted public images. Elias had seen it play out on the small television mounted in the corner of the shop, usually tuned to the news. Just a few months prior, he'd watched a segment on Governor Stern launching a new Community Heroes initiative. The governor, charismatic and smooth, spoke of celebrating unsung individuals. Elias had grunted, switching the channel. It felt worlds away from the tangible, uncelebrated good he tried to foster within his own four walls. He remembered a local councilman, during a contentious neighborhood redevelopment meeting a year ago, gesturing dismissively towards his block. "We need progress, not just sentimental attachment to old barbershops and corner stores," the councilman had said, the words stinging Elias with their casual disregard for the community's heart. That comment had solidified his belief that those in power often saw only surfaces, not the currents running beneath. The barbershop itself was an anchor in a sea of change. Located on a street that had seen grander days, it was nestled between a bodega with a brightly painted mural and a laundromat that perpetually smelled of warm cotton. Inside, the scent was a comforting mix of talc, citrus aftershave, and the faint, sweet aroma of the pomade Elias used. Sunlight, when it broke through the often grimy window, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, catching the chrome of the vintage Coke chairs. Photos of local boxing heroes, jazz musicians, and even a few faded pictures of his father and grandfather at work adorned the walls, a silent lineage. The steady hum of the clippers, the rhythmic snip-snip-snip of shears, the murmur of conversation, these were the sounds of a sanctuary. The regulars, men who had been coming for decades, treated their appointments as vital. They'd often say, "See you at church, Elias," as they left, and he'd just nod, a faint smile touching his lips. This quiet reverence hinted that what happened here resonated far deeper than a simple grooming service. It was a place where men felt restored, not just tidied up. The true inciting incident arrived not with a bang, but with a hesitant phone call. It was a young reporter from a small, citywide community newspaper, her voice earnest. "Mr. Washington? My name is Sarah Chin. I'm working on a piece about local volunteer efforts. And I've heard some wonderful things about what you do on Sunday mornings for veterans." Elias, who was meticulously cleaning his straight razor after the last paying customer on a Saturday afternoon, paused. His immediate instinct was to deflect. "I just cut hair, Miss Chin. Nothing special about it." He'd always believed his work with the veterans was a private covenant, its power residing in its discretion. The thought of it becoming a story made him uneasy. He imagined cameras, intrusive questions, the very essence of those quiet Sunday mornings disrupted, perhaps even tainted by public scrutiny. He linked this unwanted attention directly to the core of his service, the quiet dignity he offered. Publicity felt like a betrayal of that intimacy. Sarah Chin was persistent, though respectful. "I understand you're private, Mr. Washington, but the people who told me about you, they spoke of it with such gratitude. They said it's more than just a haircut. They said you give them back a piece of themselves." Her words resonated, touching the very reason he did it. He hesitated. Marcus, who was sweeping up, looked over, his curiosity piqued. Elias considered. Perhaps a small, carefully worded mention, focused entirely on the veterans and their needs, not on him, might be acceptable. It could even, in a small way, remind people of their existence, their quiet struggles. "If you write something," he said slowly, "it needs to be about them, not about me. And no photographs of the men unless they expressly agree and are comfortable." He felt a subtle test in this moment, a test of his ability to protect the sanctity of his Sunday ritual while acknowledging that some awareness might, if handled delicately, serve a greater good. Sarah agreed to his terms, promising sensitivity. He hung up the phone with a sense of unease, a premonition that a carefully guarded boundary was beginning to blur. He just hoped he wasn't making a mistake, allowing the outside world even this small glimpse into their sanctuary. A few weeks later, a small article appeared, tucked away in the community section. It was tastefully done, focusing on the challenges homeless veterans faced and mentioning an anonymous barber who provided a haven of dignity. Elias felt a small measure of relief that his anonymity was largely preserved, yet the ripple had begun. He started noticing a few more unfamiliar faces in the neighborhood, people who would slow down as they passed the shop, their gazes lingering. The veterans themselves didn't seem to notice, or if they did, they didn't comment. Their Sunday mornings continued with the same quiet gratitude. One man, a Marine Corps veteran named Henderson who rarely spoke more than a few words, paused after his haircut, his eyes, usually downcast, meeting Elias's in the mirror. "Heard some folks talking about this place, Elias," he'd rumbled, his voice raspy. "Good folks. Said you're a good man." Elias had simply nodded, placing a warm towel on his neck. "Just happy to see you, Henderson." Marcus, however, was buzzing with a low-key excitement. "Mr. Washington, people are noticing. Maybe this could be bigger, you know? Help even more guys." Elias understood the boy's enthusiasm, but felt a protective urge. "Bigger isn't always better, Marcus," he'd said gently, wiping down his station. "What we have here, It's about the quiet, the trust. You turn it into a spectacle, and you lose the heart of it. Marcus had looked thoughtful, though a little disappointed. This difference in perspective created a subtle tension, a reminder for Elias that his personal desire for quiet impact might soon clash with a world eager to celebrate, and perhaps exploit, such stories. Then, a crisp, official-looking envelope arrived in the mail, bearing the state seal. Elias opened it with a sense of trepidation. It was a brief, formally worded letter from a junior aide in the governor's office, acknowledging his commendable service to the veteran community and stating that his efforts had come to the attention of Governor Stern. It mentioned the governor's commitment to supporting veterans and concluded with a vague intimation that they might reach out again in the future. Elias read it twice, a knot tightening in his stomach. This was no longer a local paper. This was the capital. He felt a growing pressure, a sense that his small, private world was being drawn into a much larger, more public arena, one where he felt ill-equipped and unwilling to play. He worried that the genuine, human connection he fostered would be overshadowed by political posturing. The personal stake was the very soul of his Sunday mornings. If that became a stage, the veterans would be the first to feel the chill of insincerity. The following Saturday afternoon, a well-dressed woman with a brisk, no-nonsense air entered the shop. She introduced herself as Ms. Albright, an assistant to Governor Stern. The shop was empty of customers at that moment, just Elias and Marcus, who was practicing lathering techniques on a balloon. Ms. Albright's eyes swept around the modest space, taking in the worn chairs, the old-fashioned equipment, her expression unreadable but giving Elias the distinct impression of being assessed. "Mr. Washington," she began, her tone polite but carrying an undercurrent of authority, "Governor Stern is very impressed by the accounts he's heard of your initiative here. He's keen to understand more about grassroots efforts like yours." She asked a series of questions that felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. How many veterans did he serve? How did he fund it? What were their primary needs? Elias answered calmly, truthfully, keeping his responses concise. He felt a rising defensiveness, a need to shield the men he served from what felt like bureaucratic scrutiny. Marcus watched, wide-eyed and silent. Ms. Albright made notes on a sleek tablet. "The governor believes in recognizing community pillars," she said, finally. "He might be interested in seeing your work firsthand. Perhaps a visit next Sunday." Elias's heart sank. This was what he had feared. "Ms. Albright," he said, his voice even, "this is a quiet time for these men. It's about their peace. I'm not sure a visit would be appropriate." She smiled thinly. "The governor is very discreet, Mr. Washington. He simply wants to show his support. Think about it. We'll be in touch." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a chill that the warm afternoon sun couldn't quite dispel. Elias felt a dip in his morale, a weariness. He looked at Marcus, who seemed both intimidated and thrilled. "This is getting serious, mystery," Marcus whispered. Elias sighed, running a hand over his tired face. He felt the weight of an impending decision, a confrontation not of anger, but of worlds colliding. The bell above the door chimed the next morning, punctual as the sunrise. And this time, it wasn't a veteran seeking solace, nor an aide making inquiries. The moment the bell chimed, Elias knew. He'd been prepping his station, the familiar scent of coffee he brewed especially for Sundays already filling the air. Marcus was by the window, ostensibly cleaning it, but Elias knew the boy was watching the street. When Marcus's eyes widened slightly and he subtly straightened up, Elias steeled himself. The door opened, and Governor Stern stepped inside, followed by the same brisk aide, Ms. Albright, and, more discreetly, a plainclothes security man who remained near the entrance. The governor, taller than he appeared on television, exuded a practiced affability. He extended a hand. "Mr. Washington, I presume? An honor to meet you." His voice was smooth, campaign trail perfect. This was it. The game changer was no longer a possibility, it was standing in a shop, bringing the full weight of the state capital into his humble sanctuary. The pressure was immediate, palpable. There was no countdown clock, but the duration of this visit, this haircut, felt like a high-stakes performance he hadn't auditioned for. Elias's tactical plan, formed in the restless hours of the previous night, was one of steadfast authenticity. He would treat the governor as he treated any man who sat in his chair, with respect, professionalism, and a focus on the task at hand. But he also resolved that if an organic opportunity arose, he would speak, not for himself, but for the dignity of the men he served, for the quiet power of simple human connection. The risk was considerable. He could be dismissed as naive, his words lost in the political calculus, or worse, his sincerity could be co-opted for a photo opportunity, cheapening the very essence of his work. He took a steadying breath, wiped his hand on his apron, and shook the governor's outstretched hand. "Governor, welcome to my shop." His voice was calm, betraying none of the apprehension churning within him. Marcus hovered, unsure whether to retreat or offer assistance. Elias gave him a small nod towards the coffee pot, a silent instruction to offer hospitality as he would to any guest. The shop was otherwise empty. Elias had subtly suggested to his usual Sunday early arrivals the day before that this morning might be a little different, advising them to come a bit later if they could. He wanted to shield them from this. The governor settled into the main barber chair, the very same chair where countless veterans had found a moment of respite. Ms. Albright stood a few feet away, observant and alert. The security detail remained an unobtrusive presence by the door. The usual Sunday morning jazz, a mellow saxophone solo, drifted from the speakers, a strangely calming counterpoint to the tension Elias felt. "So," Governor Stern began, as Elias draped the cutting cape around his shoulders, "I've heard a lot about what you do here, Mr. Washington. It's quite remarkable." Elias met the governor's eyes in the mirror. "I just provide a service, Governor. A haircut, a shave, something to help a man feel a bit more himself." He picked up his comb and shears, the familiar way to small comfort. His hands, he was relieved to see, were steady. He began to work, the snip of the shears precise, rhythmic. The air thickened with unspoken expectations. For several minutes, the only sounds were the jazz, the metallic whisper of the shears, and the distant city waking up. Elias focused on the lines of the governor's hair, the texture, treating it with the same meticulous care he afforded every client. Remarkable nonetheless, the governor mused, his gaze in the mirror thoughtful. "In my line of work, we talk a lot about programs, about funding, but sometimes it's these direct, human gestures that make the most difference, wouldn't you say?" This was the opening, if Elias chose to take it. He paused for a fraction of a second, then continued cutting. "It's important for these men to know they're not forgotten, Governor. Many of them served with honor. They've seen hard things, done hard things for this country." He kept his tone even, respectful, but infused with a quiet conviction. A hot towel, a clean shave, it's small. But it's also about dignity. About being seen as a man, not just a statistic or a problem to be solved. He recalled Henderson's rare smile, the quiet gratitude in the eyes of a young veteran who'd confessed he hadn't looked in a mirror for months before coming to Elias's chair. For a little while, in this chair, they're not homeless, they're not just a veteran with issues. They're just a man getting a haircut. And sometimes, that's everything. Elias could feel Ms. Albright's gaze on him, sharp and analytical. The governor was quiet for a moment, his expression in the mirror unreadable. Elias continued his work, moving to the clippers for the taper, the hum a steady bass line. He felt a surge of something akin to fear, not for himself, but that he might fail to convey the profound simplicity and importance of what this space represented. But overlaying that fear was a quiet pride, a clarity about his purpose that transcended the unusual circumstances. This was his church, and he was speaking its truth. He wasn't seeking praise or funding, only understanding. He was advocating for the intrinsic value of seeing another human being, truly seeing them, beyond labels and circumstances. The governor finally spoke, his voice softer now, less political. "Dignity," he repeated, almost to himself. "You're right. That's not something a government program can easily legislate or deliver." He looked at Elias's reflection, then at his own. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle lessening of the official tension, replaced by something more akin to genuine reflection. "You're doing more than giving haircuts, Mr. Washington. You're offering a sanctuary." The words, unexpected in their directness and perception, landed with gentle force. It wasn't a grand pronouncement or a promise of sweeping change, but it was an acknowledgement, a moment of true seeing. Elias felt a profound sense of relief. He had spoken his piece, not as a petitioner, but as an equal, a craftsman sharing the heart of his craft. The moral victory wasn't in changing policy on the spot, but in bridging the gap between two very different worlds, if only for an hour, with honesty and respect. The governor was no longer just a politician in his chair. He was a man who, for a moment, seemed to grasp the quiet power of Elias's simple, persistent act of grace. As Elias finished the trim with a meticulous outlining of the neck, he felt he had honored the trust of the men he served. When the haircut was complete, Elias unfastened the cape. Governor Stern rose, looking at his reflection, then turned to Elias. "Thank you, Mr. Washington," he said, his voice sincere. "This has been enlightening." He reached for his wallet, but Elias gently waved his hand. "No charge on Sundays, Governor. Not for anyone who sits in this chair before noon." A flicker of surprise, then understanding, crossed the governor's face. He nodded slowly. "Of course." He extended his hand again, and this time, the handshake felt different, less perfunctory, more a gesture of genuine respect. Ms. Albright, for the first time, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod that Elias took as a sign of grudging approval. With a final thank you, the governor and his aide departed, the security man following. The bell above the door chimed, and then there was silence, save for the soft jazz. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He stood for a moment, shears still in hand, looking at the empty chair. Marcus, who had been brewing coffee and discreetly observing the entire exchange, approached him slowly, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. "Mr. E," he whispered, "that was wow." Elias managed a faint smile. He felt a quiet sense of peace, a deep-seated affirmation. Later that morning, as Henderson settled into the chair, he looked at Elias with his usual quiet intensity. "Heard the big man was in earlier," Henderson rumbled. Elias just nodded. "He got his trim." Henderson grunted, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Good. Maybe he learned something." A few weeks later, Marcus excitedly showed Elias an article on his phone. A modest new state fund had been quietly established, aimed at supporting small, community-based initiatives that provided dignity services and mental well-being support for veterans. There was no mention of Elias or his shop, no grand announcement, just a simple outline of the program. Elias read it, a slow warmth spreading through him. It wasn't about recognition, but about the ripple effect. Perhaps the governor had indeed learned something. Shortly after, a discreet package arrived at the shop, containing high-quality shaving supplies, towels, and a gift certificate to a Barber supply store, with a simple and signed note, "Keep up the good work." Elias knew where it came from. He was later invited by a low-level staffer from the governor's office to join an informal advisory group on veteran outreach. He politely declined a formal role but offered to share his insights if they ever genuinely needed a ground-level perspective, emphasizing that the best way to help was to directly empower the veterans themselves and the grassroots efforts that truly understood their needs. The Sunday mornings at Elias's shop continued, unchanged in spirit, though perhaps a little better stocked. The quiet ritual remained, the jazz played on, and the men who came still found their sanctuary. There was a subtle shift, though, a renewed sense of hope among the veterans, a feeling that even their quiet struggles could be seen, their dignity acknowledged by those in power, not through grand gestures, but through quiet understanding. Elias, watching Marcus expertly apply a hot towel to a veteran's face one Sunday, felt a deep sense of continuity. Marcus had started talking about maybe, one day, setting up a similar quiet service for another overlooked group in the city. The boy was learning more than just how to cut hair. He was learning the profound impact of quiet service. As the last veteran left that particular Sunday, the scent of bay rum and coffee lingering in the air, Elias began his usual cleanup. He swept the clipped hair from the cracked linoleum, wiped down the worn leather of the chair, his movements methodical, almost meditative. He caught his own reflection in the large, age-spotted mirror, a simple barber in a small shop. But there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes, a peaceful strength. He had not sought the light, but when it found him, he had used it not to illuminate himself, but to shine it, ever so gently, on those who had lingered too long in the shadows. He switched off the main light, leaving only the single bulb humming over the empty chair, and looked out the window at the street waking up to a new week, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The jazz played its final, soulful notes. I believe in the power of quiet acts of kindness to make a profound difference. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.